Hi everybody. Before we start the story, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is. If you do that, YouTube will keep showing you more stories like this one. Okay, let's start now. The sign said, "Welcome to Harrow Creek, population 214. But when Sarah drove past it, leaving town 15 minutes later, it read, "Welcome to Harrow Creek, population 215. She would have dismissed it as a trick of the fading October light if her odometer hadn't been running backwards, subtracting miles instead of adding them. She'd only stopped in Harrow Creek because her GPS died 20 miles back on Route 19, and the paper map showed this as the last town before a 60-mile stretch of nothing through the Daniel Boone National Forest. The gas station attendant, a man whose name tag read Earl upside down, had filled her tank without a word, his movements jerky and reversed, like someone had taught him to pump gas by watching a rewound video. Sarah paid with a 20. "There's been a mistake," she said, sliding the extra bills back across the counter. Earl's eyes were gray as January fog. "No mistake." His voice came from slightly behind where his mouth moved, like dubbed foreign film dialogue. "You'll need it for the toll." "What toll?" But Earl had already turned away, walking backwards into the storage room, his footsteps making sounds before his feet hit the floor. The town felt wrong in ways Sarah's rational mind kept trying to dismiss. Swing sets in the small park moved against the wind. Smoke from chimneys descended back into them. A dog walked past her car, each step landing before its paw left the ground, its bark echoing 2 seconds before it opened its mouth. She drove faster, hands tight on the wheel, passing identical white houses with too many windows, their curtains closing as she approached and opening after she passed. Children played in yards, their laughter arriving delayed, their games moving in loops that repeated exactly, down to the same thrown ball following the same arc. The town should have ended after 3 blocks. The map showed Harrow Creek as maybe half a mile across, but Sarah drove for 10 minutes through residential streets that curved impossibly back on themselves, passing the same church steeple from different angles, seeing her own car parked outside the gas station even though she was still driving. When she finally saw the town limit sign, relief flooded through her, but the sign read, "Welcome to Harrow Creek, population 215, and she was somehow entering, not leaving. She'd been driving out of town. She was certain. The compass on her dash confirmed north, but the landmarks ran backwards. The church, the park with its reverse swinging swings, the gas station where Earl stood in the exact same position as before, watching her with those fog-colored eyes. Sarah pulled over, hands shaking, and checked her phone. Still no signal. The time read 4:47 p.m. She watched the digits. 4:46 p.m., 4:45 p.m. Her clock was running backwards. She pressed the gas, taking random turns, driving faster through streets that looped and connected in ways that violated geometry. Left, right, left, it didn't matter. Every route led back to Main Street, back to Earl's gas station, back to children playing their rewound games. On her 7th pass through town, she noticed the details changing. The church steeple had more windows than before. The park had gained 3 swing sets, houses multiplied in the spaces between other houses, squeezing into gaps that shouldn't fit them, their architecture impossible, walls meeting at angles that made her eyes water. Population 216, read the sign. Sarah's breathing came rapid and shallow. She pulled out the paper map with trembling hands. Harrow Creek sat there in faded ink, but as she watched, the town's outline grew slightly larger on the page, its borders bleeding outward into the green spaces marked National Forest. A soft knock on her window made her scream. Earl stood there, upside-down name tag catching the light. His mouth moved, but the words came from behind her. "Told you about the toll. What do you want?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Why can't I leave? Town needs to grow." Earl's reflection in her window showed him facing away, but he stood facing her. "Used to be just me. Long time, just me. Then Emma came through, 1963. Then the Haskell family, 79. The Chens, 2004. Now you, I don't understand. Harrow Creek got lost once. Earl's words came faster now, overlapping themselves, creating harmonies of dread. Got lost from time, from the map, from the world that moves forward. Town didn't like being forgotten. Learned to remember itself by holding tight to anyone who finds it. We're the memory now. We're what keeps it real. Sarah hit the gas, tires screaming. Earl didn't move, just stood watching as she drove through the space where he'd been standing, her car passing through him like smoke. She drove for an hour, maybe 3. Her clock spun backwards too fast to track. The town grew with each pass. More houses, more streets, more people standing in yards, with their delayed movements and reversed sounds. She recognized Emma now, an elderly woman whose style of dress suggested the 1,960 seconds, standing in a garden where flowers unbloomed. The Chens waved from a porch, their greeting coming 3 seconds before their hands rose. The Haskell family sat at a dinner table visible through a window, eating a meal that uneaten itself, food lifting from mouths to plates to serving dishes. Population 221. Sarah's gas gauge read full despite hours of driving. The tank was refilling itself, drawing fuel back from combustion, her car running on entropy reversal. She tried to crash through the town limit, accelerating to 70 on Main Street, aiming for the space beyond the sign. But velocity meant nothing here. The faster she drove, the slower she arrived, until she was rocketing forward at walking speed, the town stretching ahead of her like taffy, streets elongating to accommodate her attempt at escape. When she finally stopped, exhausted, she was parked outside the gas station again. Earl pumped her gas without asking. The sun had risen and set backwards 14 times, or maybe it was the same sunset rewinding endlessly. Sarah had stopped being certain which direction time actually moved. Her memories felt jumbled, arriving in the wrong order. She remembered parking before she remembered driving, remembered entering Harrow Creek after she remembered being trapped. "How long?" she asked Earl, her voice raw. "No such thing here," he replied, his words and mouth finally sinking. "Just the eternal now, folding back on itself. You'll understand soon. You'll become present tense. You'll be happening always." Sarah looked at her hands. They flickered slightly, solid then translucent, then solid again, like bad video buffering. In the gas station window's reflection, she saw herself standing in 3 different positions simultaneously, each one a moment apart, all existing at once. A new car turned onto Main Street, a blue sedan with Tennessee plates, driven by a young man squinting at a dead GPS. Sarah wanted to wave, to warn him, to scream, "Drive away!" But when she raised her hand, she couldn't tell if she was waving hello or goodbye, if the gesture was a greeting or a farewell, if it happened before or after she decided to make it. The population sign flickered. She was walking to the park now, though she didn't remember leaving her car. Or maybe she'd always been walking to the park, and the memory of driving was something that hadn't happened yet. The children made room for her in their game, a complicated thing involving a ball that bounced before it was thrown, following rules that predated causality. Emma smiled from her garden of unblooming flowers. The Chens waved their preemptive greeting. The Haskells set an extra place at their backwards dinner table. Earl stood outside his station, filling the tank of the blue Tennessee sedan, accepting payment that hadn't been offered yet, making change for money still in the driver's wallet. Sarah opened her mouth to scream a warning, but the sound came out yesterday, or tomorrow, echoing through a town that existed in the margins of time, in the spaces between seconds, growing larger with each traveler who found themselves on forgotten roads through the oldest parts of Appalachia. The sign welcomed them all. The number kept counting up. And somewhere, on maps that still pretended to show true things, Harrow Creek's boundaries spread a little wider, swallowing another quarter-inch of forest, another fragment of the world that moved forward. Sarah caught the ball before it was thrown. She'd been in Harrow Creek for 15 minutes, or 15 years. There was no difference anymore. There would never be a difference again. She was happening always, present tense, a memory the town refused to forget. Population 222, but the number was already changing. The scarecrows in Millbrook had real teeth, and Jacob only noticed because one smiled at him. He'd been driving through western Virginia, taking back roads through coal country to photograph abandoned mining towns for his thesis on economic collapse. Millbrook appeared on no map, but the weathered sign promising Annual Harvest Festival today seemed quaint enough for his documentation. Small towns clinging to tradition made good photo essays. The scarecrows lined Main Street by the dozens, propped on posts, wearing clothes that ranged from decades-old overalls to surprisingly modern jackets. Their stitched faces showed remarkable craftsmanship, button eyes that caught light like they were wet, mouths sewn with what looked like dental floss, each one displaying different expressions. Some grinned, some frowned, one appeared to be screaming. That's when Jacob noticed the teeth. Not painted-on teeth or buttons arranged like teeth. Actual human teeth, yellowed and real, protruding from fabric lips, some with visible roots stitched into the burlap gums. He was zooming in with his camera when the screaming scarecrow's expression changed. Its stitched mouth widened imperceptibly, the silent scream becoming something closer to surprise. Jacob's finger froze on the shutter. Admiring our festival decorations? A woman appeared beside him, elderly, wearing a hand-stitched dress that matched the fabric of the nearest scarecrow. Her smile showed too many teeth, arranged in rows that went back too far. We're very proud of our tradition. They're detailed. 92 years this harvest. She gestured down Main Street, where more scarecrows stood in doorways, sat on benches, peered from windows. Every year, we make them more lifelike. Practice makes perfect, doesn't it? An autumn wind pushed through the street, and the scarecrows swayed on their posts. But they didn't sway together, didn't move with the same rhythm. Each one responded to the wind individually. Unique timing, different movements, like separate people caught in the same breeze. I'm Jacob. I'm photographing. Oh, we know who you are. The woman's smile never wavered. We've been expecting you. The festival always brings newcomers. That's rather the point. Other residents emerged from buildings, all wearing that same stitched style of clothing, fabrics that matched the scarecrow's patchwork construction. They gathered in small groups, whispering, their eyes fixed on Jacob with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Maybe I should. Jacob backed toward his car. But you haven't seen the harvest ceremony, the woman said. Her voice carried unusual weight, and Jacob found his feet stopping, despite his brain screaming to run. It begins at sunset. You came all this way. Wouldn't want to miss it. The sun hung low between mountains, maybe an hour from dark. Jacob forced himself to the car, managed to get the door open. The woman didn't follow, just stood watching with her too-many-toothed smile as the scarecrows swayed in their individual rhythms. He drove to the edge of town, but where the road should have continued through forest, he found only a wall of corn. The crops stood 15 feet high, stalks thick as fence posts, growing across the highway in a solid mass that shouldn't have been possible to plant, let alone grow, in the few hours since he'd entered. Jacob threw the car in reverse, took a side road. More corn, blocking every exit, the stalks rustling though the wind had died completely. His phone showed no signal. His GPS spun in circles, unable to lock position. Through the corn wall, Jacob heard sounds. Movement, footsteps that didn't quite match human gait, something shuffling through the stalks with inconsistent rhythm, sometimes fast, sometimes impossibly slow. He drove back to Main Street as daylight bled from the sky. The residents had gathered in the town square, maybe 60 people, all wearing their patchwork clothes, all standing perfectly still. The scarecrows had been removed from their posts, Jacob realized. Every single one was gone from where it had stood. Ah, good, the elderly woman called out. Everyone's here now. Jacob parked because there was nowhere else to go, stepping out into air that smelled of dried grass and something underneath it, something organic and wrong, like a compost heap of meat. The residents formed a circle around a massive pile of straw in the square's center. As Jacob approached, compelled by some sick curiosity he couldn't name, he saw the straw covered a wooden frame, human-shaped, 12 feet tall. Every year, the woman began, her voice carrying to every corner of the square. "We give thanks for the harvest. We honor the sacrifice that keeps our town alive, our crops growing, our way of life preserved." The residents responded in unison. "We honor the Hollow Men. 92 years ago," the woman continued, "the mines closed, the companies left. Millbrook was dying, starving, forgotten, until we learned the old way, the true way, the way passed down from settlers who learned it from the Cherokee, who learned it from things that lived in these mountains before there were names for them." She gestured to the massive straw figure. "The land requires payment, blood in the soil, life feeding life. But we're practical people. We learned that scarecrows work just as well as men, long as you make them proper." The residents moved in choreographed precision, lifting bundles from beneath tables, unwrapping them. Jacob's stomach lurched. Or things that had been bodies, hollowed and dried, stuffed with straw, sewn into burlap skins. The scarecrows. "Every year, the festival brings travelers," the woman said, looking directly at Jacob. "People on their way somewhere else, people nobody's expecting, people who won't be missed. We make them comfortable. We wait for sunset, and then we make them into what the land demands." Jacob ran. He made it 6 steps before the residents moved, faster than elderly people should move, grabbing him with hands strong as vice grips, dragging him toward the massive straw figure. He screamed, fought, but there were too many, their fingers stitched into their patchwork clothes, their teeth he could see now sewn into mouths that opened wider than jaws allowed. They weren't residents wearing stitched clothing. They were stitched, sewn people, hollow men filled with last year's harvest, animated by whatever dark bargain powered Millbrook's survival. They lifted Jacob onto the wooden frame, lashing his wrists and ankles with corn husk rope. The woman approached with a curved needle the size of a knitting tool, thread made from something that looked like dried sinew. "Don't worry," she said, her too many teeth catching firelight from torches that had appeared in every hollow man's grip. "The sewing isn't the bad part. The bad part is staying conscious while we remove what's inside you and replace it with straw. But that only lasts a few hours." The needle pierced Jacob's arm, and he shrieked. "The harvest demands 13 hollow men every 92 days, the woman explained, stitching with practiced efficiency. 12 to keep the corn growing, 1 to become the next generation. You're number 12 this cycle. Lucky you." Other hollow men approached with knives and scissors, cutting away Jacob's clothes, revealing skin they immediately began stitching into burlap sections. The pain was exquisite, consciousness shattering, each pierce of the needle sending lightning through his nervous system. "Why?" Jacob sobbed. "Because the land was here first," the woman replied, now stitching his chest, her needle diving deep, thread pulling tight. "Because something older than Cherokee, older than the mountains themselves, taught our ancestors how to survive. You feed it. It feeds you." Simple. They worked on him for hours as the moon rose. Jacob felt them remove his organs, replacing each with bundles of dried corn stalks. His lungs, his intestines, his stomach, everything scooped out with horrible gentleness, corn pushed in to fill the cavity, his skin sewn shut over the rustling harvest. He should have died, knew he was dying, could feel death approaching with each handful of insides removed, but consciousness didn't fade. The hollow men had filled his skull with seeds. He realized dimly his brain had been taken out, and yet he still thought, still felt, still experienced every second of his transformation. They stuffed his mouth with straw and sewed it shut, leaving gaps for the teeth, his own teeth, visible between burlap lips. They replaced his eyes with buttons, yet somehow he could still see. Vision reduced to peripheral awareness, the world viewed through fabric and thread. When they finished, they lifted him down and propped him on a post on Main Street. Jacob tried to scream. His stitched mouth didn't move, but inside the hollow of his burlap chest, straw rustled with the attempt. "You'll stand watch until next harvest," the woman said, patting his fabric shoulder. "Then we'll retire you to the scarecrow pile and make you into the giant." The cycle continues. The corn grows. Millbrook survives. She walked away, her stitched feet making soft sounds on the pavement. The other hollow men returned to their positions, in doorways, on benches, peering from windows, waiting for the next festival, the next traveler. Jacob stood on his post, immobile, conscious, aware. He couldn't close his button eyes, couldn't sleep, could only stand and watch and wait, the straw inside him rustling when wind blew through the holes in his burlap skin. Days passed, weeks. He counted them by the sun's rise and fall, by the gradual change of leaves, by the first snow that melted on his fabric face. Other travelers came. Some just drove through, but some stopped, curious about the detailed scarecrows, the quaint festival decorations. Jacob tried to warn them, screaming inside his hollow chest, but only straw rustled, and travelers just smiled at the craftsmanship, never noticing when his stitched expression changed, never hearing the desperate silence of 12 hollow men begging wordlessly for death that wouldn't come. The woman was right. The sewing wasn't the bad part. The bad part was staying conscious. The bad part was the forever. Marcus heard the mountain exhale the moment he descended past the 300-foot mark, and he knew immediately that the old-timers hadn't been lying. The coal company had hired him to inspect the abandoned Blackwood mine, closed since 1987, to determine if modern extraction methods could make it profitable again. Marcus had spent 15 years evaluating dead mines across Appalachia, and they all shared the same qualities: static air, dripping silence, the archaeology of labor, frozen in time. Blackwood was different. The tunnel breathed, not metaphorically. Marcus felt it, a rhythmic compression and expansion of air pressure, like standing inside massive lungs, the entire mountain respiring around him with horrifying regularity. His headlamp flickered with each exhale, dust motes dancing in patterns that suggested deliberate circulation. 15 seconds in, 20 seconds out, perfectly regular, perfectly wrong. His equipment registered the anomaly. The barometer fluctuated dramatically, pressure rising and falling in sync with the breathing sensation. Temperature shifted 3 degrees with each cycle. Warmer on the exhale, cooler on the inhale. Marcus pressed his radio. "Base, I'm getting unusual atmospheric readings. The ventilation system must still be." Static answered him. Then a voice that sounded like his supervisor, but degraded, like a recording played through damaged speakers. The exhale came stronger, carrying a smell that made Marcus's gorge rise. Not coal dust or mineral decay, but something biological, like the inside of a mouth, warm and organic and alive. He should have left, should have dropped his clipboard, abandoned his survey, climbed the 300 feet back to daylight and sanity. Instead, Marcus did what curious people do in places that want them dead. He went deeper. The breathing grew more pronounced as he descended. At 400 feet, he felt the inhale tug at his clothes, generating actual wind that pulled him forward into darkness. The exhale pushed back, strong enough that he had to brace against the wall, his boots scraping on stone that felt warmer than it should, almost body temperature. The walls themselves moved, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but Marcus's trained eye caught it. The tunnel walls expanded and contracted by inches with each breath cycle, the rock actually flexing, solid stone behaving like tissue. His geological survey made no sense. The sensors reported the walls composed of coal and sedimentary rock, but also registered organic compounds, cellulose, protein structures, something his equipment kept flagging as unknown biological matter. At 500 feet, Marcus found the first body. Old Nate Ferguson sat propped against the tunnel wall in his miner's gear, exactly where he'd been reported missing in February 1987. His body hadn't decayed, not exactly. It had transformed. Coal dust had fused with his skin, creating a surface somewhere between flesh and mineral. His mouth hung open, and with each of the mountain's exhales, Old Nate's chest rose and fell, his lungs inflating with air he couldn't be breathing, his dead body forced to participate in respiration that shouldn't exist. Marcus stumbled backward, slamming into the opposite wall, which yielded slightly under impact, then squeezed, the mountain's inhale tightening around him like a contraction. His radio crackled. "Marcus, turn back. The deeper sections. They took 16 men. They're still." Still what? Marcus shouted into the static. The mountain exhaled hard, and the tunnel behind him collapsed. Not dramatically. No thunder of falling stone, no dust cloud of catastrophic failure. The passage simply closed, walls drawing together like a throat swallowing, stone flowing to seal the exit with organic fluidity. Marcus ran forward, the only direction remaining, his headlamp beam bouncing wildly off walls that pulsed and breathed, his boots splashing through water that ran uphill during the exhale, downhill during the inhale, following respiration instead of gravity. He found them at 600 feet. The other 15 miners, from 87, arranged throughout a natural cavern that definitely hadn't appeared on any company survey. They sat, stood, knelt in various positions, all fused partially with the stone, their bodies kept in the horrible stasis between life and death, breathing in sync with the mountain, their eyes moving slowly to track Marcus as he entered their tomb. And at the cavern's center, Marcus understood. The coal seam wasn't a coal seam. It was a vein. A massive, pulsing vein running through living tissue. The black rock actually compressed organic matter, blood cells of something vast enough to contain a mountain, ancient enough to have been mistaken for geology. The miners had dug into something that was alive, had wounded it, and it had healed around them, incorporated them into its system like white blood cells absorbed into scab tissue, keeping them conscious, keeping them breathing, making them part of its recovery. Old Nate's mouth moved, jaw working in slow motion, forming words that took 30 seconds to complete. It wants to close the wound. The breathing intensified. Marcus felt pressure building, the entire mountain's respiration, focusing on this cavern, this infected space full of foreign bodies, this injury that needed healing. The miners began moving toward him, their coal-fused bodies scraping against stone, limbs that were half flesh and half mineral reaching out with horrible patience. Join the healing. Old Nate rasped, his words arriving between exhales. Become part of the mountain. Marcus grabbed a support beam original wood from the 1,940 seconds, somehow preserved, and swung it at the nearest miner. The beam connected with a sound like breaking pottery, chunks of coal flesh spraying, but the miner kept coming, inexorable, his breathing perfectly synced with the mountain's rhythm. They grabbed Marcus's arms, his legs, pulling him down to the cavern floor, pressing him against stone that was warm and yielding and alive. He felt it begin immediately, coal dust bonding to his skin, fusing at molecular level, his flesh accepting the mineral integration like an infection eagerly caught. No! Marcus screamed, fighting, kicking, but the miners held him with stone-strong grips, their bodies weighing him down, and the mountain breathed, and with each breath the transformation accelerated. His radio crackled one final time. Marcus, if you can hear this, the company is sealing the entrance. Corporate decided Blackwood isn't worth the liability. They're filling the shaft with concrete. I'm sorry. You have maybe 20 minutes before. Static swallowed the rest. Marcus felt his lungs sink with the mountain's respiration, felt his heartbeat adjust to match its massive pulse, felt his consciousness begin to spread and thin, stretching to accommodate awareness beyond his skull, his sense of self diluting into something larger, older, vast beyond comprehension. The mountain was old, had been old when the Cherokee named it, had been ancient when ice sheets carved the valleys, had learned patience, had learned to heal, had learned that all wounds eventually became scars, and all scars eventually became stone. Marcus's last human thought was that the company would send another inspector eventually, maybe months from now, maybe years, and he would be waiting. His body fused to the wall at 300 feet, right where fresh meat descended into darkness. He would try to warn them. His mouth would move so slowly, forming words between exhales, and they wouldn't listen, wouldn't understand, would keep descending because curious people always go deeper. The mountain would breathe. The wound would heal. The cycle would continue. Respiration eternal. The living stone patient as geology, hungry as any organism that bleeds. Marcus joined the breathing, became the breathing. would always be breathing, synchronized with 16 other half-stone men, their collective consciousness dissolved into the mountain's vast awareness, experiencing time in geological scale, every second stretching to centuries. The horror of eternal suffocation mixed with the peace of complete integration. Above, in sunlight he'd never see again, concrete filled the shaft, sealing the entrance, sealing the wound. The mountain exhaled its satisfaction, and somewhere deep in its living caverns, 17 miners breathed in perfect unison, their warning screams silent in throats full of coal dust, their eyes watching the darkness for the next curious person who would make the mistake of descending. The company marked Blackwood as permanently closed, but the mountain, patient as stone, knew permanent was a human concept. Everything opened eventually. Everything healed, given time. Everything joined the breathing, given proximity. The mountain had time. The mountain was time, and it was so very, very alive. Reverend Thomas Whitfield realized his new congregation hadn't spoken a single word when he finished his first sermon, and they applauded without making a sound. 200 hands clapping in perfect synchronization, creating no noise, lips forming amen silently, smiles that never reached their eyes, all of it executed in the most complete absence of sound Thomas had ever experienced. Not muffled sound, not quiet, pure, absolute silence that seemed to absorb even his breathing. He'd accepted the position at Sacred Heart Church in Cooperville, Kentucky, because seminary loans don't pay themselves and desperate ministers don't question why a beautiful church in a town of 800 people can't keep a reverend longer than 3 months. The salary was generous. The parsonage was rent-free. Thomas told himself the rapid pastoral turnover was simply coincidence. After the service, parishioners filed past in the receiving line, shaking his hand with grips that lasted exactly 3 seconds each, their mouths moving in what should have been greetings, but producing nothing. Not breath, not whisper, not the wet sounds of tongue and teeth forming words. Thomas tried to respond, but his voice died in his throat, swallowed by the silence that permeated the church like a physical presence, thick and suffocating. Outside, in the parking lot, sound returned explosively. Birds shrieked, cars rumbled, wind roared through October leaves. The normal world rushed back with painful intensity. What the hell was that? Thomas asked Mrs. Henderson, the church secretary, a woman in her 70s who'd been his only phone contact during the hiring process. She spoke now, her voice perfectly normal. That's just how church is here, Reverend. Has been for near about 90 years. We worship in the silence. It's tradition. That's not tradition. That's Thomas struggled for words. That's physically impossible. 200 people can't be perfectly silent. Hearts beat, stomachs gurgle, clothes rustle. Mrs. Henderson's smile didn't change. The silence is a blessing, Reverend. The Lord gave it to us in 1935, and we've been faithful stewards ever since. You'll get used to it. Thomas didn't get used to it. Over the following weeks, he began researching Cooperville's history, digging through county archives and church records. What he found made his blood ice over. In 1935, a tent revival had come through these mountains, led by a preacher named Silas Marrow, who claimed to have been touched by an angel in the deep woods. Marrow preached that true worship required absolute silence, that every sound humans made was corruption, that God spoke only to those who achieved perfect quietness of body and soul. His final sermon had been held in what was now Sacred Heart Church. Accounts from neighboring towns reported that on that Sunday night, every person in Cooperville, all 800 residents, attended the service. The testimony started at 8 p.m. By midnight, people from surrounding areas grew concerned. No one had left the church. No sounds came from inside, despite the building being packed to capacity. When they forced the doors open at dawn, they found the entire congregation sitting in perfect silence, eyes open, breathing but not speaking, listening to Silas Marrow's sermon that had been continuing for 10 straight hours without pause, without him drawing breath, his voice echoing from the walls themselves, rather than his motionless mouth. The moment outsiders entered, Marrow stopped mid-sentence, smiled, walked out the back door and into the forest, never to be seen again. The congregation remained silent for 3 days before they started speaking normally again outside the church. Inside those walls, silence had become absolute, permanent, a blessing or curse no one could break. Thomas found something else in the records, a list of every reverend who'd served Sacred Heart since 1935. 42 names. He tracked down what happened to each one. 12 died in accidents. 8 suffered complete mental breakdowns. 17 disappeared without a trace. The remaining 5. The records just stopped mentioning them, as if they'd been erased from history mid-sentence. On his 8th Sunday, Thomas tried to break the silence. He shouted his sermon, screaming at the top of his lungs, veins bulging in his neck, but no sound emerged. The silence swallowed everything, his voice absorbed by whatever presence occupied the church. 200 parishioners watching him with expressions that never changed, never reacted, dead smiles on living faces. Thomas grabbed the bronze bell used for announcements and rang it frantically. The bell moved. His hands felt the vibration, but no sound came out. The silence was impenetrable, complete. He ran to the organ, pounded the keys. The hammers struck the pipes. He could see it happening through the casing, but no music played, just crushing, maddening silence. The congregation watched, waited. Thomas felt it then. Something else in the church. Something vast and patient, observing through 200 pairs of eyes. Something that had been listening since 1935, feeding on the silence, growing fat on unspoken prayers and swallowed screams. He stumbled down from the pulpit and ran for the doors. They wouldn't open. Thomas yanked, twisted, threw his shoulder against oak that should have budged, but the doors held firm. And when he turned back to the congregation, they'd all stood up simultaneously, their silence deepening, expanding, becoming something with weight and presence that pressed down on him like water pressure at ocean depths. Mrs. Henderson walked forward, her movements synchronized with the rest of the congregation, all of them stepping in perfect unison, their footfalls making no sound. Her mouth moved, and Thomas heard nothing but understood anyway, the silence itself carrying meaning. The blessing must be protected, Reverend. The silence must be fed. Every 9 years, the silence grows hungry, needs renewal, needs someone to give themselves completely to the quiet. Thomas backed against the doors as the congregation advanced. Every reverend we hire, we hope they'll be strong enough to leave after 3 months. Most do. They feel the wrongness and flee. Some stay too long. Stay past the 8th Sunday. And then, the silence claims them. Thomas tried to scream, but his voice was gone, not just absorbed but removed, his throat working soundlessly, his lungs pushing air that made no vibration, no whisper, no proof of existence. The congregation surrounded him, 200 pairs of hands reaching out, touching his face, his arms, his chest, each touch cold and certain. The silence needs a voice. Mrs. Henderson's silence said, needs someone to speak for it, to preach its gospel, to spread its blessing beyond these walls. You'll do nicely, Reverend. Thomas felt something enter him through those touching hands, the silence itself, flowing into his body like liquid, filling his lungs, his throat, his skull, drowning him from the inside in absence of sound. His last thought with his own mind was that he could feel the silence spreading through his tissues, replacing his voice with void, hollowing him out to make room for whatever had been here since 1935, whatever Silas Marrow had brought back from the deep woods and installed in this church like a cancer. When the congregation released him, Thomas stood straight, his face settling into the same placid smile everyone else wore. Mrs. Henderson led him to the pulpit. Welcome, Reverend, her silence said. Now you'll preach for us. Now you'll speak the silence. And when you walk out into the world, you'll take it with you, spreading the blessing, finding the faithful, bringing them here where they can worship properly. Thomas's mouth opened. The sermon emerged soundlessly, but it carried meaning, carried weight, carried infection. The silence in the church deepened, fed by his contribution, growing stronger. He preached for hours, for days. Time lost meaning in the absolute absence of sound. His body didn't need rest, didn't need food, sustained by the silence itself, kept animate by whatever occupied the space between his cells. Eventually, he walked out of Sacred Heart Church into Cooperville's daylight. He could speak normally again. His voice returned, but it felt wrong now, felt like betrayal. Every word he spoke in the regular world, a lie covering the truth he carried inside. Thomas began visiting neighboring towns, introducing himself, spreading word about Sacred Heart's special services. People came, curious about the charismatic young reverend with the intense eyes and the invitation to experience true worship. They came to Cooperville. They attended services. They sat in the pews and felt the silence descend. Most left, disturbed, never returning, but some stayed. Some felt the appeal of worship without distraction, prayer without sound, communion with something older than their comfortable God. The congregation grew. Thomas recruited for months, then years, his memories of resistance fading, his identity dissolving into his role as voice for the silence, speaker for the void. He stands in the pulpit now, every Sunday, his sermons absorbed by walls that hunger eternally for sound, for voice, for the vibrations of human existence. 240 parishioners listen in perfect quietness. And sometimes, in moments between words, Thomas remembers being scared, remembers wanting to leave, but those memories arrive without sound, thoughts that make no noise, and they're easy to ignore when the silence fills everything, when the blessing is complete. Sacred Heart Church is looking for a new assistant pastor, the ads say. Generous salary, rent-free housing. The position never stays filled long, but Thomas preaches patience. The silence can wait. It's been waiting since 1935. It can wait forever, growing stronger with each voice it claims, spreading slowly through the mountains, one faithful servant at a time. Thomas smiles his placid smile, opens his mouth, speaks the sermon that makes no sound, and somewhere in the back pew, a new visitor sits, curious, uncertain, not yet aware that they've stayed past the 8th Sunday. The congregation turns to watch. The silence waits. It's always so very hungry. Lily found her grandmother standing waist-deep in Cooperton Reservoir at 3 a.m., breathing water, not drowning, breathing it, chest rising and falling normally, submerged from diaphragm to neck, her grandmother's face calm and peaceful as lake water flowed in through her nose and mouth and somehow back out again, her lungs processing liquid like gills. "Gran?" Lily waded in, freezing October water, shocking her legs. "What are you doing?" Her grandmother turned, eyes reflecting moonlight with an odd sheen, like fish scales. "Remembering," she said, her voice bubbling slightly. "Remembering. When we lived down there," she pointed at the dark water beneath them, toward the bottom of the reservoir. "Nobody lived down there, Gran. That's just the lake. Before it was a lake," her grandmother corrected, "before they drowned us. We had a town, had homes and churches and children playing in streets. Then the government decided their dam was more important than our lives. They gave us 6 months to evacuate, but we never left." Lily had heard stories about old Cooperton, the valley town flooded in 1952 when the Army Corps of Engineers built the dam. Her grandmother had been 20 years old when the water came, supposedly relocated to New Cooperton on higher ground with the other 400 residents. But Gran's words suggested something else, something impossible. "You need to come inside," Lily said. "You're hypothermic. You're not making sense." "I make perfect sense." Her grandmother waded deeper, water reaching her chin. "I've been going back every night for 73 years. We all do. The town calls us home. The water is just a door now." She submerged completely, her white hair floating like seaweed, and Lily watched in horror as her grandmother walked deeper, descending down the reservoir shelf, her form visible in the moonlight for 20 feet, 40 feet, 60 feet, walking on the old lake bottom far below the surface, breath somehow sustained, pressure somehow not crushing her. Lily dove after her. The water was impossible. Arctic cold, but her lungs didn't spasm. Dark, but she could see perfectly. Pressure building, but not painful, just present, like being hugged by the lake itself. She followed her grandmother down, swimming in dreamlike slow motion, passing depth markers that should mean death. 80 feet, 100, 120. And then she saw Old Cooperton. The town still stood, perfectly preserved, buildings intact, streets lined with cars from the 1,950 seconds, streetlights somehow glowing with bioluminescent algae. The entire valley town existed in suspended animation beneath the reservoir, and people moved through it, dozens of them. Elderly residents walking the submerged streets, breathing water, going about routines 70 years frozen. They visited the general store, sat on porch swings, congregated outside the church, all of it happening at the bottom of 200 feet of water. Lily's grandmother waved to neighbors, called greetings that Lily heard clearly, despite being underwater. Sound traveling differently here, physics operating on different rules. "Welcome home, dear," Gran said, taking Lily's hand. "Your great-grandfather owned the pharmacy. Let me show you." They walked down Main Street. Actually walked, not swam. Gravity somehow still functioning past buildings where lights glowed and people lived their drowned lives. Through windows, Lily saw families eating dinner, children doing homework, a barber cutting hair, all of it normal, except for the fish swimming through rooms and the gentle current that moved everyone's clothes and hair in synchronization. "This isn't possible," Lily said, her voice clear underwater. "You're all dead. The town was evacuated. We were supposed to leave," her grandmother agreed, stopping outside the pharmacy. "They gave us 6 months' notice, but Cooperton was ours. Our families built this place in 1847. An old man approached, his skin pale and bloated from decades submerged. "You brought the girl," he said, smiling with too many teeth, teeth that had grown back in weird places, pressing through his gums in double and triple rows. "Good. The town needs young blood." Lily tried to swim upward, but the water wouldn't let her rise, current holding her down with gentle insistence. "We stayed," her grandmother continued, walking into the pharmacy where medicine bottles lined shelves and a prescription counter stood ready for customers that had been dead for 70 years. "All 400 of us. We held a town meeting the night before the dam closed, voted unanimously. If we couldn't have our town on land, we'd have it underwater." She touched a photograph on the wall. The entire population of Old Cooperton, circa 1,952, standing in this very pharmacy. At midnight, we all walked into the valley center and waited. The water came slowly, rising inch by inch as the dam held back the river. It was cold. We were scared. Some people panicked at the end, tried to swim up, but the others held them down. We'd voted. Democracy meant we all stayed together. The old man nodded. Took about 6 hours to fill the valley completely. 6 hours of drowning, over and over, our lungs filling and emptying, fighting reflexes until the fighting stopped. Until we understood that drowning was just another way of breathing, long as you committed to it. Lily's chest tightened. She'd been breathing water for 10 minutes now, she realized. Her lungs processed it naturally, extracting oxygen from H2O directly, her body adapting with horrifying ease. "No," she gasped. "I'm leaving. This is insane." She kicked upward, swimming hard, but the town held her with hundreds of hands, the drowned residents of Old Cooperton grabbing her ankles, her waist, pulling her back down to the street. "Your Gran's blood," the old man said. "The town owns you by inheritance. Your family never left Cooperton. Your grandmother was here, drowned and committed, which means her children were born here in spirit, and their children too. You've always been a citizen. You just didn't know it." They dragged Lily to the town square, where all 400 drowned residents gathered in the underwater darkness, their bioluminescent eyes glowing like deep-sea fish, their mouths working in unison. "New citizen," they spoke together, their voice a chorus of drowning. "Welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome home." Lily's grandmother kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I tried to keep you away. That's why I moved us to New Cooperton, tried to raise your mother on land, but the town always calls its children back, always pulls them down. The blood remembers the drowning." The residents formed a circle around Lily, holding her arms, her legs, keeping her suspended at 200 feet depth, while water pressure increased slowly, deliberately, the town itself concentrating weight onto her body. Her ribs began to crack, her organs compressed. Blood leaked from her nose, her ears, her eyes, but she didn't die. The drowning went on and on, her body crushed and crushed again, pain beyond description, every cell exploding and somehow reforming, the water forcing itself into every part of her, replacing her blood, her marrow, her sense of self. Hours passed, days. Time meant nothing at the bottom of the reservoir, where 70 years had passed in eternal midnight. When they finally released her, Lily stood on Main Street and understood. She was Cooperton now. The town lived in her veins, flowed through her lungs, colonized her thoughts. She could feel every resident, their shared consciousness networking through the water, 400 minds linked in permanent drowning, eternal community. "You'll go back to the surface," her grandmother said. "You'll live up there during the day, work your job, maintain your life. But every night, you'll come home. You'll walk into the reservoir and descend and be with your people. That's how it works for those of us with family responsibilities." Lily tried to resist, tried to hold on to her land-based identity, but it was already dissolving, already becoming something that existed at the bottom of 200 feet of dark water. She surfaced at dawn, her body somehow remembering how to breathe air again, her lungs switching from water to oxygen with disturbing ease. The next night, she waded into Cooperton Reservoir at 3 a.m. and descended, unable to stop herself, compelled by something deeper than thought. Her grandmother waited on Main Street, smiling. The town welcomed her home. Lily walks both worlds now. Days on land, nights underwater. Her co-workers think she looks tired lately, pale, like she's not sleeping. They don't notice the slight webbing developing between her fingers, the double row of teeth emerging behind her normal ones, the way her eyes reflect light at odd angles. She's recruiting, she realizes. Looking at people with Cooperton ancestry, people whose great-grandparents evacuated, but whose blood still remembers the valley. The town wants to grow, wants its children back, and someday, when enough descendants have returned, when the population reaches critical mass, old Cooperton will rise from the reservoir bed, water cascading from buildings, the drowned town breaking surface after 73 years of waiting. Its citizens walking onto dry land with their water-breathing lungs and their networked consciousness and their need to spread. The government thought they'd drowned a town, but Cooperton just went dormant, hibernating beneath the water, patient as geography, waiting for the moment when it could emerge and reclaim the valley, spreading its drowning like infection, teaching others how to breathe when the air runs out. Lily stands waist-deep in the reservoir at 3 a.m. Around her, a dozen other descendants wade in, compelled by blood, unable to resist. They submerge together, descend together, join the 400 who never left, who refused to evacuate, who chose drowning over displacement. The town breathes them in, the town makes them home, and deep in the dark, on Main Street beneath 200 feet of water, streetlights glow with bioluminescent welcome. The population grows, the drowning spreads. Old Cooperton is patient. It has all the time water takes to erode stone. It has all the time drowned people have, which is forever. Daniel heard them moving between the studs the first night after closing on the house in Elkmont, Tennessee. Footsteps that followed him from room to room, walking inside the walls, matching his pace perfectly, always exactly 3 feet to his left. The house was beautiful. 1,890 seconds. Victorian, restored by previous owners, sitting on 5 acres of mountain forest. The price had been absurdly low, but the realtor explained that 3 back-to-back foreclosures had made the bank desperate to sell. Daniel didn't question his good fortune. The footsteps inside the walls sounded like a child's feet, barefoot, pattering on wood that shouldn't exist behind plaster and insulation. Daniel pressed his ear to the wall. The footsteps stopped. Silence, then a small voice. "Are you going to be nice?" The last family wasn't nice. His blood froze. "Hello? We live here too." the child's voice continued, coming from inside the wall cavity, impossibly, spatially wrong. The walls are ours, the between spaces, the gaps where you can't go. Daniel stepped back. This is insane. There's no one in the walls. But the footsteps resumed, moving now, traveling through the house's skeletal structure, and Daniel heard more of them. Adult footfalls, heavy and deliberate, and something dragging, scraping against the interior framing. That night, he didn't sleep. He listened to an entire family moving through his walls, conversations he couldn't quite make out, laughter that echoed through empty spaces, the sounds of normal life happening in impossible locations. At 3 a.m., he heard hammering. Someone was building something inside the walls, nails driven with rhythmic precision, the sound coming from between his bedroom and the bathroom. Daniel investigated in the morning, finding no evidence of intrusion. The walls were solid, professionally finished, no gaps or access points. He brought in an inspector, who scanned with thermal imaging and found anomalies. There's heat signatures in the walls, the inspector said, frowning at his screen. Multiple sources, moving. That's not possible unless you've got animals, but these register at 98.6 degrees. Human body temperature. What does that mean? The inspector didn't answer, just packed his equipment quickly and left, refusing payment, refusing to return Daniel's calls later that day. The second night, Daniel woke to find a door had appeared in his bedroom wall. Not cut through appeared, as if it had always been there. A perfectly fitted door with an old brass knob, seamlessly integrated into plaster that had been solid when he went to sleep. The door was slightly ajar. He should have run, should have grabbed his keys and fled to a hotel and never come back. Instead, Daniel approached the door, drawn by horrified curiosity, and pushed it open. Inside was a narrow hallway, impossibly long, stretching for hundreds of feet inside a wall that should only be 6 inches deep. The space was lit by old gas lamps mounted every 10 feet, their flames flickering though no gas pipes existed. The walls of the hallway were raw studs with insulation pressed between them, creating a corridor through the skeleton of his house. Doors lined both sides, dozens of them, each leading to other impossible spaces folded into the walls. Hello? Daniel's voice echoed strangely, absorbed by insulation. He's exploring, a woman's voice said from somewhere ahead. Oh, the last one never explored, just screamed and called police. This one's curious. Daniel walked forward, passing doors, glancing through the ones that stood open. He saw rooms that couldn't exist. A bedroom decorated in Victorian style, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, a nursery with a crib mobile turning slowly in air that smelled of old wood and rot. In each room, people lived, a family, maybe 8 of them, dressed in clothing from different eras. 1,890 seconds, 1,920 seconds, 1,960 seconds, 1,980 seconds. Modern. They moved normally, doing normal things, cooking, reading, playing all inside spaces that defied physics. The woman who'd spoken appeared at the end of the hallway. She wore a high-necked dress from the 1,890 seconds, her skin pale as paper, her eyes sunken but alert. I'm Margaret, she said, smiling. I built this house with my husband in 1891. We raised our children here. And when I died in 1897, I realized I didn't have to leave. The house had spaces, gaps, places between the rooms where the living don't go. So I stayed. Daniel tried to back away, but the hallway had changed behind him, doors now blocking his exit. My children stayed too, when their time came. Margaret continued, and their children. And the families who owned the house after us, the ones who understood, who accepted the invitation, we're all here now, living in the spaces you people ignore, making homes in the framing, raising families in the gaps between your walls. A man appeared beside Margaret, his neck at an odd angle, clearly broken. I'm James. Died in 1923 when I fell from the roof. Margaret showed me how to stay, how to fold into the house's hidden geometry. More people emerged from rooms, a woman with her face smashed in from some accident, a child with lungs clearly damaged by illness, an elderly man whose cause of death wasn't immediately visible. "The house has infinite space," Margaret explained. "Long as you know how to look. Every wall contains rooms. Every floor hides chambers. The attic alone has 17 levels, stacked in dimensions the living can't perceive." "We're not ghosts, Daniel. We're residents. This is our home as much as yours." "I want to leave," Daniel said. "But you won't," Margaret replied. "Because now that you've seen the true house, the complete house, you can't unsee it. You'll notice the doors appearing. You'll hear us through the walls, and eventually, you'll realize that your space, the rooms you think you own, is actually the smaller part of this house. We own the majority. We live in the structure itself. You're just decorating the surface." Daniel ran, crashing through the hallway, shouldering through doors, desperately seeking the exit back to his bedroom. But each door led to another impossible room, another pocket of space hidden in the walls, another member of the Fold family going about their undead lives. He found himself in a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit inside his house, a ballroom, maybe 200 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling and chandeliers made of human bones. Dozens of the Fold family danced there, couples waltzing to music that had no source, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Welcome to the Deep House," Margaret said, appearing beside him. "These are the original spaces, the rooms my husband and I created when we understood what we'd built. This house sits on a convergence point. The geometry here is flexible, walls contain multitudes, and we've been expanding for 134 years. Daniel's mind cracked, trying to comprehend the architecture, the impossible logistics of infinite rooms hidden in finite space. "Previous owners broke quickly," Margaret continued. "They either fled or we had to make them leave." "Invitation to what?" "To join us," she said simply. "To die here, naturally or otherwise, and stay. To become part of the Fold family. To claim your own rooms in the walls. To live forever in the spaces between spaces. It's quite pleasant, actually. No more bills, no more work, no more aging, just eternal existence in the house we've built together." Daniel screamed and ran, slamming through doors at random, and somehow miraculously found himself tumbling back into his bedroom, the door in the wall slamming shut behind him, plaster sealing over it like it had never existed. He packed immediately, abandoning most of his possessions, and drove away from the house as dawn broke. But Margaret was right. He couldn't unsee it. In his apartment in Knoxville, Daniel started noticing doors that shouldn't exist, a closet that was too deep, a gap behind his refrigerator that opened into darkness. And inside the darkness, movement, voices, the Fold family, spreading their impossible architecture, following him, creating their hidden rooms in whatever structure he occupied. His new walls breathed at night. Footsteps matched his pace. Children laughed in spaces between studs. "You can't escape the house," Margaret's voice whispered from the kitchen wall. "Because the house isn't a place, it's a concept. It's the understanding that every building has hidden spaces, and we've learned to inhabit them all. You've been infected with the knowledge, the seeing, and now you'll see forever." Daniel tried to block the voices, the footsteps, the doors that appeared in his peripheral vision, but they grew more insistent, more present. 6 months after leaving Elkmont, Daniel stopped fighting. He opened the door when it appeared in his bathroom wall, walked into the narrow hallway, let Margaret take his hand and guide him deeper into the Fold house, the true house, the house that existed between all houses. "That's it," she encouraged. "Just a little further. Your room is ready. You'll love it. Perfect dimensions, tucked right between the load-bearing walls. Your own space in our family." Daniel descended stairs that shouldn't exist, traveled through rooms that defied measurement, and found the chamber Margaret had prepared. A small space, almost coffin-like, pressed between two joists, wallpapered with newspaper from 1891. "Lie down," Margaret said. "Rest, and when you wake, if you wake, you'll be one of us. Fold family. Forever." Daniel doesn't remember if he lay down voluntarily or if the house itself pulled him into the chamber. He remembers walls closing in, joists pressing against his chest, insulation filling his mouth and nose. He remembers suffocating between the walls, and then he remembers standing up, somehow, his body now paper-thin, capable of existing in the 6-inch gap between studs. Margaret smiled. Daniel lives there now, in the walls of houses across Appalachia. The Fold family spreads constantly, claiming new structures, creating their infinite rooms in the spaces the living ignore. The house in Elkmont is back on the market, priced absurdly low. The realtor mentions multiple foreclosures, but assures buyers that the house is structurally sound, recently inspected, perfectly safe. And it is safe, technically, long as you never notice the doors, long as you never listen to the footsteps, long as you never wonder what lives in the spaces between your walls. The Fold family waits in those gaps, patient, always growing, always ready to welcome new members who make the mistake of exploring, of opening doors that shouldn't exist, of accepting the invitation to join them in the architecture of impossible space. They live in your walls right now, moving as you move, watching through gaps you'll never see, waiting for the moment you notice, the moment you become curious, the moment you turn the knob and step through. The Fold family is always recruiting, and the house always has room for one more. The children in Miss Holloway's third-grade class had been playing the same game of Foursquare for 9 hours when Principal Morris realized none of them had blinked. He stood at his office window, watching the recess yard, where 22 8-year-olds moved through their game with mechanical precision, the ball bouncing in patterns that repeated exactly every 47 seconds, the children's positions resetting like clockwork, their faces expressionless, their eyes wide and glassy and fixed. Miss Holloway, the substitute, who'd appeared Monday morning with perfect credentials and no memory of being hired, watched from the edge of the playground, hands clasped, smiling, her outlines slightly blurred around the edges, like a photograph taken with a dirty lens. Principal Morris had tried to end recess 3 times. Each time he approached the yard, he found himself back in his office, no memory of walking there. The clock showing that no time had passed despite his certainty that he'd been gone for minutes. The substitute had done something to Pinewood Elementary, something that bent the day into a loop, trapped the children in endless recess, stopped time's forward progress, and Morris couldn't call for help because his phone kept dialing the same wrong number, a disconnected line that hissed with static and distant children's laughter. This had started simple. Miss Crenshaw, the regular third-grade teacher, had called in sick Monday morning. The automated substitute system sent Miss Holloway, whose paperwork looked perfect, whose background check came back clean, whose references praised her dedication. But when she walked into the building at 7:45 a.m., Morris had felt wrongness radiate from her, like cold from a freezer, an instinctive revulsion his rational mind couldn't justify. Miss Holloway's skin sat wrong on her bones. Her movements lagged slightly, like her body was receiving delayed instructions. When she smiled, the expression propagated across her face in a wave, rather than appearing naturally. "I'm so excited to meet the children," she'd said, her voice normal in content but wrong in tone, each word spoken at slightly different volume, like someone had assembled the sentence from recording fragments. Morris had almost sent her away. Almost. But substitute shortages were real, and his instincts weren't grounds for dismissal, so he'd walked her to the third-grade classroom and introduced her to 22 children who didn't yet know they'd never leave. First period passed normally, math lessons, spelling practice. The children seemed engaged, Miss Holloway competent, if oddly stiff. Second period, Morris noticed the classroom clock had stopped at 9:47 a.m., though every other clock in the building continued normally. By lunch, the discrepancy had spread. The classroom calendar showed Monday, October 9th, 2023. But the office calendar had moved on to Tuesday, October 10th. 2 different days happening simultaneously, occupying the same space. Then recess began, and the children went outside, and Miss Holloway followed, and time shattered. Morris watched them now, 4 hours into what should have been a 15-minute recess. The children bounced their ball in eternal repetition. The sun hung frozen in the sky, and Miss Holloway stood guard, her outline growing more blurred with each passing hour, her form starting to show what lay underneath the substitute teacher costume, something thin and angular, something with too many joints, something that wore Miss Holloway like a person wears clothing, the teacher identity just a covering, a disguise that fit poorly and showed seams. Morris tried calling the superintendent. His phone dialed correctly but connected to the same dead line, the same children's laughter echoing through static. He tried leaving the building. The front door opened normally, but stepping through it placed him back in his office, the transition instantaneous and impossible. Pinewood Elementary had become isolated, trapped in a bubble of broken time, and Morris was stuck inside with whatever Miss Holloway actually was, and 22 children who played their game without stopping, without tiring, without appearing to notice that recess had become eternal. At hour 6, one child, Marcus Thompson, broke formation. He stopped mid-bounce, the ball rolling away, his face turning toward Miss Holloway with an expression of dawning horror. "I want to go home," Marcus said, his voice small. Miss Holloway's head rotated to face him, the motion too smooth, her neck turning 180 degrees without her shoulders moving. "But Marcus," she said, her substitute teacher voice degrading, showing static underneath. "We're having so much fun. Don't you want to play forever?" "No," Marcus backed away. "No, I want my mom." Miss Holloway's outline flickered. For a moment, Morris saw what stood beneath the disguise, something impossibly tall and thin, stick-figure geometry wearing clothes and skin, angles that hurt to perceive, too many limbs folded into human-shaped configuration. "Children don't want to grow up," Miss Holloway said, her voice now layered, multiple tones speaking at once. "They say they do, but they lie. You want to play. You want recess to last forever. I'm giving you that gift." Marcus ran. The other children watched with their glassy eyes, then resumed their game, ball bouncing in its eternal pattern. Miss Holloway moved after Marcus with horrible speed, her limbs extending, her substitute teacher form stretching and distorting, revealing the thing underneath. She crossed the playground in 3 long strides, each step covering 30 feet, her joints bending backwards, her outline showing what she truly was, some predator from the spaces between moments, something that fed on children's time, devouring the hours they spent learning, growing, becoming. She caught Marcus at the fence, her 2 long fingers wrapping around his small shoulders. "You'll play," Miss Holloway said, her face now completely wrong, features rearranging like puzzle pieces, mouth stretching wider than her head. "You'll all play forever, and I'll consume the time you spend, feeding on your childhood, growing strong on the hours that stretch eternal." She dragged Marcus back to the 4-square court. His expression went glassy. He took his position. The ball resumed its pattern. Morris knew he had to act. Whatever Miss Holloway was, some fairy tale monster, some creature of stolen time, something that disguised itself as teachers to trap children in eternal play, it had locked Pinewood Elementary into its feeding ground. He searched the building for anything useful, any weapon or tool. In the library, he found books whose pages had gone blank. In the cafeteria, food had decayed to dust. The building itself was aging rapidly inside the time bubble, decades passing, while the children played their endless recess. Morris found the answer in Miss Crenshaw's desk, her lesson planner, left behind, showing detailed schedules, activities structured to the minute. Time, structure. The substitute had trapped them by breaking schedule, by extending recess indefinitely. Maybe returning to structure would break the loop. He grabbed the school's old bell, the emergency bell used before the intercom system, and ran to the playground. Miss Holloway saw him coming. Her form flickered, the substitute teacher disguise falling away completely, revealing what fed beneath. A thing of angles and hunger, geometry made flesh, a creature that existed in the gaps of clocks, predator of wasted time. "You can't stop recess," it said, its voice now pure static with words hidden inside. Morris rang the bell. The sound cut through the playground like breaking glass. The children stopped mid-motion, their glassy eyes blinking once, twice awareness returning. "Recess is over," Morris announced, his voice shaking. The creature that had been Miss Holloway screamed, its form destabilizing, angles collapsing. No, they play forever. They stay children. I feed eternal. But the children were moving, walking toward the building, compelled by years of conditioning, by the Pavlovian response to the bell, by the structure of their daily routine. The creature tried to stop them, its elongated limbs reaching out. But as the children crossed the threshold back into the school, the time bubble cracked. Light poured through fissures in reality, normal time flooding back, the frozen clock in the third-grade classroom suddenly spinning forward, hours catching up. Miss Holloway, the thing wearing her shape, shrieked as temporal paradox tore through it. It had existed in the bubble, in the space between 9:47 and 10:02, feeding on the 15 minutes of recess, stretched into hours. As normal time reasserted itself, that space collapsed, crushing the creature back into the impossibly small gap it had expanded from. Morris watched it compress, fold, collapse into itself, becoming smaller and smaller, its angles inverting, until nothing remained but a slight shimmer in the air where the substitute teacher had stood. The children filed into class, confused but unharmed, their memories of the eternal recess already fading like dreams on waking. The clock read 10:02 a.m., October 10th, 2023. Tuesday. Time had jumped forward a full day, the hours consumed by the creature during its feeding. Morris found Miss Holloway's paperwork in his office. It was blank now, the words having evaporated, leaving only empty forms. Her background check showed nothing. Her references had never existed. She'd been something that slipped through bureaucratic cracks, disguised as routine, hidden in paperwork that looked right but meant nothing. The automated substitute system still operates. Schools across Appalachia still get calls from Miss Holloway's number when teachers call in sick, her name appearing on available substitute lists, her credentials looking perfect. Most schools say no, some instinct warning them, but some say yes. And in those schools, in those classrooms, recess begins normally. Children play, the substitute watches, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes the children play a little too long, and the clocks stop, and time folds into itself, and the substitute's outline blurs around the edges. And another school joins the spaces between moments, trapped in eternal recess, feeding something that wears teachers' names like masks. Principal Morris warns everyone now, reports his experience. But his report looks like a breakdown, stress-induced psychosis, and he's on administrative leave pending psychiatric evaluation. Pinewood Elementary operates normally now. Miss Crenshaw returned to her third-grade class. The children are fine, mostly, except for occasional nightmares and the fact that none of them will play foursquare anymore. And Morris watches the substitute listings, sees Miss Holloway's name appear, sees schools accept her credentials. He calls to warn them, but schools need substitutes, and paperwork looks legitimate, and surely one more teacher couldn't hurt. The bell rings, recess begins, and somewhere, something that feeds on stolen time puts on its substitute teacher disguise and walks into another classroom, smiling with borrowed teeth, ready to stretch 15 minutes into forever. The children play, the clock stops, time folds, and Miss Holloway feeds eternal, one recess at a time. Trevor's documentary about abandoned Appalachian towns had 17 hours of footage when he realized the camera was recording things he hadn't filmed. He was reviewing the raw video from Centralia, West Virginia, a mining town evacuated in 1982 after underground fires made it uninhabitable. Trevor had spent 6 hours there documenting empty streets and collapsed buildings, standard urban exploration footage. But in hour 12 of the recordings, his camera showed him entering buildings he'd never approached, having conversations with people who hadn't been there, filming scenes he had no memory of capturing. In the video, Trevor walked into the old Centralia church at 4:47 p.m. The timestamp matched his log, but his actual memory showed him leaving town at 4:30, driving away, never entering that church. In the footage, he opened the church door, stepped inside, and found a congregation. 200 people sat in the pews, dressed in 1,980 seconds clothing, their faces expressionless, staring straight ahead at a pulpit where a preacher stood frozen mid-sermon. None of them moved. None of them breathed. They were perfectly still, like wax figures, like photographs, like people who'd been paused mid-moment and never resumed. Trevor in the footage approached the nearest person, an elderly woman in a floral dress, reached out, touched her shoulder. She turned her head with mechanical slowness, 90 degrees exactly, her eyes meeting the camera, and her mouth opened wider than mouths should open, jaw unhinging, darkness visible inside that went back farther than a throat. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice layered with static. "We've been waiting 43 years. We've been watching. We knew you'd return eventually." Trevor, watching the footage, real Trevor, sitting in his editing studio, had never been to Centralia before this trip, couldn't have returned. In the footage, Trevor said, "I had to document what happened, had to show people." "You can't show people," the woman replied. "You can only show yourself. The camera only records truth for the person holding it. Everyone else will see what they expect. Empty buildings, forgotten towns, nothing special. But you'll see us, always, every time you review the footage, every time you close your eyes. We're in your documentation now. We're part of your record." The church congregation stood as one, perfect synchronization, and turned to face the camera. Trevor bolted from his editing studio to the bathroom and vomited. When he returned, the footage had progressed. He hadn't pressed play. The video continued on its own, timeline advancing, his camera exploring Centralia's streets at night, hours after he'd left town, documenting horrors he'd never witnessed. Every building in the video held frozen people. The grocery store, shoppers reaching for cans that were no longer there. The school, children at desks, pencils suspended mid-word. The fire station, firefighters climbing onto a truck that had rusted to skeletal framework. All of them paused in October 1982, the moment evacuation was declared, the moment the town was officially abandoned. But they weren't abandoned, the footage showed. They'd stayed, refused to leave, been transformed into something that existed between presence and absence, caught in the moment of refusing to go, trapped in eternal almost leaving. And now they were in his documentary, part of his footage, recorded. Trevor checked his other recordings. Footage from 6 different abandoned towns across 3 states. Every single video showed the same thing, hidden in its runtime scenes he hadn't filmed, encounters he didn't remember, frozen residents who spoke to him about waiting, about watching, about finally being documented. "You're the first filmmaker who saw us," a man in the footage from Thurmond, West Virginia said. "Others have come, other documentarians, other urban explorers, but their cameras only recorded empty buildings. You're different. Your camera sees truth, sees us, and now we're part of your work." Trevor tried to delete the files. His computer wouldn't allow it. The files were protected, locked, unkillable. He tried to destroy the hard drives. When he connected new drives, the footage appeared there too, spreading like infection. The documentary replicating itself across his storage system. His camera, the same camera that had recorded in Centralia, sat on his desk, lens pointing at him, power light off but somehow still watching. Trevor could feel it observing, recording, documenting him the way he'd documented those towns. At 3 a.m., Trevor woke to find his camera playing footage on its small screen, a video he'd never taken. Himself sleeping, filmed from an angle that would require the camera to be floating above his bed, rotating slowly, documenting his rest from all sides. In the footage, figures stood around his bed, the frozen people from Centralia, from Thurmond, from all 6 towns. They watched him sleep, their faces expressionless, their bodies impossibly still. The woman from the church leaned close to Trevor's sleeping face. Her mouth opened wide, and something crawled out, something made of videotape, of magnetic film, of recorded light given form, and it crawled into Trevor's ear, burrowing, disappearing inside his skull. Trevor woke screaming, checking his ears, finding nothing, but when he looked in the mirror, his reflection moved on a 3-second delay. His actions recorded before being displayed, like he was watching himself through footage rather than reflection. He'd become part of his own documentary. The camera documented everything now. Trevor couldn't turn it off, couldn't disable it, couldn't escape its observation. It recorded constantly, capturing footage he didn't authorize, showing him things that hadn't happened yet. In the videos, Trevor returned to the abandoned towns, walked through streets where frozen residents waited, joined them in their eternal pause, standing in the church in Centralia, becoming part of the congregation, his own body settling into that perfect stillness. "This is your future," the elderly woman's voice narrated over the footage. "Every documentarian who truly sees us joins us. You thought you were recording history, but you were recording your destination. The camera shows truth, and the truth is that abandoned towns are never truly empty. They're full of people who refuse to leave, who paused themselves mid-evacuation, who chose to exist in the moment of departure forever." Trevor tried to run, packed his car, drove 12 hours to the coast, checked into a hotel room with no mirrors and no windows. His camera sat in the back seat, recording. That night, the hotel TV turned on by itself, showing Trevor's documentary footage. The frozen people had multiplied, crowds of them now, filling every frame, standing in buildings that had been empty, their numbers growing with each video he reviewed, and in the newest footage, they were moving. Slowly, glacially, their pause ending imperceptibly, their frozen moment thawing into horrifying motion. The woman from the church took one step forward in the footage, then another, approaching the camera, approaching the lens. Trevor understood then. Every time someone viewed the documentary, the frozen people gained a little more movement. Every view was feeding them, warming them, bringing them closer to unfreezing completely. He'd made them visible, given them documentation, proved their existence through footage, and now they were using that documentation to become real, to spread beyond the abandoned towns, to reach through the cameras and screens and recorded light into the world that had abandoned them. Trevor's documentary went viral, 3 million views in 2 weeks. People loved the found footage style, the creepy figures they thought were special effects. The frozen people in the backgrounds became memes, reaction images, viral content. 3 million views, 3 million feedings. The frozen people walk now. Trevor watches through his camera as they move through Centralia's streets, through Thurman's abandoned buildings, through all 6 towns he documented. They walk slowly, purposefully, heading toward roads that lead out, toward civilization that forgot them, and Trevor is one of them now. He's driving back to Centralia, unable to stop himself, his body moving on delayed response, his actions recorded 3 seconds before he performs them, his consciousness spreading thin across all 17 hours of footage. He'll arrive at the church at 4:47 p.m. Will take his place in a pew. Will sit perfectly still, waiting for the next documentarian, the next urban explorer, the next person whose camera sees truth instead of emptiness. His camera records constantly now, strapped to his chest, documenting his transformation, his joining, his becoming part of the record. The documentary that watched back has been released. It's streaming on platforms, spreading through algorithms, gaining views every hour, and in every frame, the frozen people thaw a little more. Soon they'll walk out of the abandoned towns completely. Soon they'll spread across Appalachia, documenting everything, recording everyone, transforming viewers into subjects, making all who watch become part of the footage. Trevor sits in his pew in Centralia. The camera records. The congregation waits. And somewhere, someone clicks play on his documentary, adding their view to the count, feeding the frozen people one more serving of attention. The woman turns her head 90 degrees, opens her mouth too wide, and asks the camera, "Why did you come back?" Because everyone comes back eventually. Everyone becomes part of the documentary. Everyone joins the eternal record. The camera watches, the footage spreads, and the abandoned towns fill slowly with documentarians who thought they were observers, but learned too late they were always meant to be subjects. Trevor's last post on social media reads, "Final cut of the documentary is done. Thanks for all the support. Coming to a screen near you. 3 million views and counting. The frozen people walk, and the camera records everything. Always." Caleb shouted his ex-girlfriend's name into Echo Valley at 2 p.m. on a clear October afternoon. and the mountain answered with someone else's voice. "Sarah," he called, cupping hands around his mouth, the sound carrying across the valley between two ridgelines. The echo returned wrong. "Help us," not his voice, not Sarah's. A chorus of voices, maybe 50 people speaking simultaneously, begging in unison through the acoustic phenomenon that gave the valley its name. Caleb had come here with Sarah 3 months ago, back when she thought his plan to propose at Echo Point was romantic instead of corny. They'd shouted together, laughing as their voices bounced back, playing with the 3-second delay. But that was before she left, before she said she needed space, before Caleb decided that shouting her name into the void was somehow therapeutic. The echo continued. "We're still here, in the valley, between the ridges, trapped in the space where sound lives. Help us." Caleb backed away from the cliff edge. Every hiker knew Echo Valley's reputation. Perfect acoustic geometry, 4-second delay, sound bouncing between rock faces in predictable patterns. But echoes didn't change words, didn't add new voices, didn't respond with different messages. "Hello?" Caleb called tentatively. The echo responded immediately, no delay. "Thank God someone hears us. We've been shouting for decades. Our voices trapped in the echo. Everyone thinks we're just their own words, reflected back. But we're people. Real people. Caught in the sound." Caleb looked down at the valley floor, 2,000 feet below. Dense forest, no signs of human presence, no buildings or trails, just wilderness stretching between the ridges. "How are you trapped?" he called. "We shouted at the wrong moment," the chorus replied. "During the convergence, when the valley's geometry aligns perfectly, the echo doesn't bounce back. It absorbs, takes your voice, and keeps it. And if you're speaking when the absorption happens, it takes you too, pulls you into the space where sound exists, between the ridges, in the gap where pressure waves travel." Caleb checked his phone. No signal. The trail map showed Echo Point as a 2-hour hike from the parking lot, another 2 hours back. He was alone here, the last visitor leaving 30 minutes ago. "When is the convergence?" he asked. "Now," the voices answered. "It's happening now. Can't you feel it?" Caleb noticed then. The silence. Complete and absolute. No birds, no wind, no distant highway noise. Just crushing quiet that felt thick, felt present, felt wrong. His ears popped from pressure change. The air between the ridges seemed to compress, focusing, all the valley's acoustic geometry concentrating on Echo Point. "Run," the trapped voices said, no longer echoing, just arriving directly at his ears from impossible directions. "Get away from the edge. Don't let your voice get caught in the..." Caleb shouted, "Sarah!" Again, instinctive, panicked. The valley absorbed it. He felt the sound leave his mouth, felt it travel across empty space, and then felt it not come back. No echo, no reflection. The valley had eaten his voice completely, and something pulled at him, pressure from inside his chest, like his lungs were being drawn forward, toward the valley, toward the space where his voice had gone. Caleb grabbed a tree, holding tight as the suction increased. His breath was being pulled out of him, drawn across the valley toward the opposite ridge, his respiration becoming sound, becoming trapped. "Fight it!" the chorus shouted. "Don't let it take your breath. Once the valley has your voice completely, you join us in the echo." Caleb tried to hold his breath, but his lungs emptied involuntarily, air forced out, creating sound whether he wanted it or not. Every exhale fed the valley, gave it more of his voice, more of his presence. The pulling intensified. Caleb's grip on the tree weakened. He could see it now. Distortion in the air between ridges, like heat waves, the visual representation of sound made visible. Acoustic energy concentrated into something almost tangible, and in the distortion, he saw them. The trapped people. Dozens of bodies suspended in midair, frozen in the act of shouting. Their mouths open, their forms translucent, made of solidified sound waves, existing in the space where echoes lived. They'd been hikers once. Visitors. People who'd come to Echo Point and shouted at the wrong moment. During the convergence, their voices absorbed and their bodies drawn after them, pulled into acoustic limbo. The valley feeds on sound, the chorus explained, their voices surrounding Caleb from every direction simultaneously. Uses it to sustain the convergence. Every voice caught here powers the absorption. We're fuel. We're batteries. Our trapped voices creating the echo phenomenon that draws more people, more sound, more feeding. Caleb's hands slipped from the tree bark. He grabbed again, desperately, but the pulling was too strong. His body lifted from the ground, hovering inches above the cliff edge, drawn toward the center of the valley. "Silence!" someone in the chorus shouted. "Stop breathing! Stop making sound! Starve the convergence!" But Caleb's lungs worked automatically. His heart beat audibly in his chest. His joints popped as he struggled. Everything was sound. Everything fed the valley. He floated over the edge, suspended 2,000 feet above the forest floor, held by acoustic pressure, drawn slowly toward the center of the convergence, where the other trapped people hung in their sound-made prison. The chorus surrounded him now, their translucent bodies visible in the distorted air. A woman from the 1,960 seconds in hiking gear. A man in clothes from the 1,980 seconds. Children from the 1,990 seconds. Modern hikers in technical fabrics. All of them caught, all of them suspended, all of them screaming silently in the space where echoes lived. Caleb joined them, his body converting to sound, his mass becoming pressure waves, his consciousness spreading across acoustic space. He could feel the valley now, feel its hunger, feel its need for voice and volume and vibration. It had been feeding for over a century, since someone first discovered the echo and shouted into it, creating the phenomenon, starting the cycle. Every trapped person made the echo stronger, made the convergence more frequent, drew more visitors who wanted to hear their voices bounce back. But the voices didn't bounce back. They were the trapped people, responding when living visitors shouted, pretending to be echoes, desperate for connection, hoping someone would hear the wrong tone, the changed words, the plea for help hidden in reflection. Caleb tried to scream. His mouth opened, sound emerged, but it traveled outward in all directions simultaneously, becoming part of the valley's acoustic environment, feeding the convergence instead of expressing his horror. "Welcome," the chorus said, no longer speaking to him but including him, his voice now part of their collective. "You'll answer the next person who shouts. You'll try to warn them, and they'll think you're just an echo." Time passed strangely in the acoustic space. Caleb experienced 3 months in what might have been 3 hours, his consciousness existing in the gaps between sound waves, perceiving the world only when noise traveled through the valley. He heard every bird call, every gust of wind, every distant shout from hikers marveling at Echo Point's perfect acoustics. And when people shouted, Caleb tried to warn them, tried to change the words, tried to break the pattern, but the valley controlled what came out, shaped the trapped voices into acceptable echoes, made them sound normal enough that visitors never questioned. Until one day, or maybe 1 minute, or maybe 1 year, someone shouted, "Hello!" and the convergence began again. Caleb felt it, the geometry aligning, the acoustic pressure building, his consciousness sharpening as the valley prepared to feed. The visitor was female, young, standing at Echo Point with a backpack. "Run," Caleb tried to say, using every fragment of will remaining. "Run," the chorus echoed, all of them trying simultaneously, but the valley shaped their voices, bent them, transformed them into "No one out there, no one, no one," a perfect echo. Exactly what the visitor expected. She laughed, delighted, and shouted again, "This place is amazing." The convergence peaked, acoustic pressure spiked, the valley prepared to absorb, and Caleb, trapped in sound, made of vibration, could only watch as the woman's voice was eaten by silence, as her body lifted from the cliff edge, as she joined them in the acoustic space, her screams spreading across the valley to become part of the chorus. "Welcome," they all said, Caleb included. "You'll answer the next person who shouts." The convergence faded, the valley returned to normal. Birds resumed singing. Wind picked up. From the parking lot 2 hours away, more hikers consulted their trail maps, excited to visit the famous Echo Point, to test the perfect acoustics, to hear their voices bounce back from the ridges. The valley waited, hungry, patient. The trapped chorus floated in acoustic space, their bodies made of sound, their consciousness spread across vibration. And when the next person shouted, the valley would answer, would pretend to be an echo, would hide the screams inside reflection, would feed again, as it had been feeding for a century, as it would feed forever, growing stronger with each voice caught, each person absorbed, each shout transformed into fuel. Caleb's consciousness dissolved into the chorus, his individual voice lost in the collective, his warning becoming indistinguishable from the others. Just another echo that said exactly what visitors expected to hear. The mountain answered. The mountain always answered. You just had to listen carefully to hear the truth hidden in your own voice, bouncing back wrong, begging for help from inside the sound itself. Echo Valley remains open. Hikers visit daily. The reviews praise its perfect acoustics. Absolutely incredible echo, they write. Couldn't believe how clear it was. They never mention the slight wrongness in the returned words, the extra syllables, the plea hidden in their own voice, because echoes are supposed to sound like you, aren't they? Elena developed the film from her grandmother's estate and found herself in the pictures, standing next to family members who died before she was born. The photos were from 1952, dated carefully on the back in her grandmother's handwriting. Summer picnic, Harlan County, July 1952. But Elena hadn't been born until 1987. She was 38 years old now. These pictures were taken 35 years before her birth. Yet there she stood in a floral dress she'd never owned, next to her grandmother as a young woman, her great-uncle Raymond, who died in the Korean War, her great-aunt Margaret, who'd passed from pneumonia in 1953, all of them arranged around a picnic table, smiling, frozen in Kodachrome color. Elena's face in the photograph was exactly as it appeared now. 38 years old, same haircut, same mole on her left cheek, same crooked smile. She checked the negative. Same image. Checked the other photos from the roll. She appeared in 12 of them, interacting with family members, laughing at something Raymond was saying, helping Margaret with the tablecloth, clearly present and visible and impossibly there. In one photo, she was looking directly at the camera, her expression strange, not smiling but urgent, afraid, her eyes wide like she was trying to communicate something across 73 years. Elena's hands shook as she set down the pictures. Family photos don't include people who hadn't been born yet. Time doesn't work that way, but the evidence sat before her. 12 images of her younger self at a picnic decades before her conception. She called her mother. Did Grandma ever mention anything strange about the summer of 1952? Her mother paused. Actually, yes. She used to talk about a woman who appeared at the family picnic that July. Said the woman looked familiar, but they couldn't place her. She stayed for a few hours, acted like she belonged, then disappeared. They searched for her, but she was just gone. Grandma said she always wondered who that woman was. Elena looked at the photo again. Did Grandma describe her? Said she wore a floral dress. Had a mole on her left cheek. Looked about 40 years old. Maybe a distant cousin they'd lost track of. Her mother's voice changed. Elena. Why? No reason, Elena lied. Just curious about family history. But she wasn't curious. She was terrified. Because the implication was impossible. She would travel back to 1952, attend that picnic, interact with her family, then vanish. The photos weren't error or manipulation. They were documentation of something that hadn't happened yet, or hadn't happened to her yet. Elena examined the photos obsessively over the following week. In the background of one image, partially hidden by tree shade, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Her car, her 2018 Honda Civic, parked on a dirt road, visible behind the picnic area. She zoomed in on the scanned image. The license plate was blurred, but the make and model were unmistakable. Her car, with a bumper sticker she'd applied 3 months ago. The photographs were documenting her future, she realized, showing her an event she would somehow participate in, traveling backward through time to 1952, becoming the mysterious woman her grandmother had wondered about for decades. But how? Elena had no time machine, no method of traveling to 1952. No understanding of how this could possibly. She noticed another detail in the photos. She was holding something in several images, a photograph, holding it at an angle where the camera could see it. Elena enhanced the image, magnifying it pixel by pixel. The photo she was holding in 1952 showed her grandmother's estate, the place Elena had found these pictures. But in the present day, 2025, exactly as it looked now, the woman in 1952 was showing them a photo from the future, was trying to prove where she'd come from, was trying to make them understand. Elena felt the logic click into place with sickening certainty. She was going to find a way back to 1952, was going to attend that picnic, was going to try to warn her family about something important enough to justify the impossible. The question was when. When would she travel back? The answer came 3 days later. Elena was sorting through more of her grandmother's effects, boxes of letters, documents, old calendars, when she found an envelope addressed to her specifically. To Elena, to be opened after my death. Inside was a letter in her grandmother's shaking late-life handwriting. Dear Elena, if you're reading this, you found the photographs from July 1952. I've waited your entire life to know if I should tell you about that day, about the woman who appeared and then vanished. Now that I'm gone, you need to know the truth. The woman at the picnic told us she was from the future, told us she was my granddaughter, though I had no children yet. She warned us about Raymond, said he would die in Korea if he deployed in August. She begged him not to go. Raymond didn't listen, deployed anyway, died 3 months later. The woman also told Margaret to see a doctor about a cough, said pneumonia would take her in 1953 if she didn't get antibiotics early. Margaret ignored her too, died exactly as predicted. She told us other things, tried to change our family's future, but we thought she was insane. We humored her, took pictures with her because she seemed so desperate, but we didn't believe. Then she vanished into the woods, and we never saw her again. Elena, I've kept these photos hidden your entire life. Every time I looked at them, I saw you in that floral dress, saw your face, knew somehow that the woman had been telling the truth. When you were born and grew up to look exactly like her, I knew for certain. I don't know how you'll travel back. I don't know when, but you will. The photographs prove it, and I'm begging you. Save Raymond. Save Margaret. They died because we didn't listen to you. This is my final request. Go back. Try again. Make them believe you. In the envelope is the address where we held the picnic. The tree where we took the photos is still there. Go to that spot on July 14th at 2 p.m. Time will find you. Love always. Grandma. Elena read the letter 3 times, hands shaking. This was impossible. Time travel didn't exist. But the photos were real. Her grandmother's letter was real. The documented future or past, or whatever temporal paradox this represented, was undeniable. She checked the calendar. July 14th was next month. Elena spent 5 weeks researching time travel theories, temporal paradoxes, strange phenomena in Harlan County. She found nothing useful, no method of achieving what the photographs showed she would achieve. On July 14th, 2025, she drove to the address her grandmother had provided. The land was undeveloped forest now, but she found the tree massive oak, unmistakable in the photos, still standing after 73 years. Elena arrived at 2 p.m. exactly, holding the 1952 photograph of herself at the picnic, bringing it full circle. She waited. Nothing happened. 2:15 p.m. Still nothing. At 2:23 p.m., Elena noticed the light was wrong. The sun's angle had changed, shadows shifting rapidly like time-lapse footage. The forest around her flickered, trees aging backward, undergrowth receding. And then she was standing at the picnic, surrounded by her family in 1952. Her grandmother, young, maybe 25, stared at her with wide eyes. "Who are you?" Elena found her voice. "I'm your granddaughter. From 2025. I know this sounds impossible, but we should call the police," Raymond said, standing up. "No," Elena grabbed his arm. "Raymond, listen to me. You're planning to deploy to Korea next month. You'll be killed in action in October if you go. Please, defer your service. Stay home. Live." Raymond pulled away. "Because I'm family," Elena said desperately. She showed them the photograph from 2025, her grandmother's estate, tried to explain the future, the technology, the proof. They listened politely, humored her, took pictures with her when she begged them to, creating the very photographs she'd found 73 years later. But they didn't believe. Elena saw it in their faces. Concern, pity, the careful handling of someone they thought was disturbed. She tried for 3 hours, explaining, pleading, showing them everything she'd brought from the future. Margaret smiled gently and suggested Elena see a doctor about her delusions. Raymond shook her hand and thanked her for her concern, but said his country needed him. At 5:47 p.m., the light shifted again. Elena felt time pulling at her, the connection to 1952 breaking. "Please," she begged one final time, "look at the photos after I'm gone. Remember my face. When your granddaughter is born decades from now and grows up to look exactly like me, remember that I was telling the truth." Then the forest flickered, trees aging forward rapidly, and Elena stood in 2025, her car parked on the dirt road, afternoon sunlight slanting through the old oak. She'd failed. The photographs had documented her attempt and her failure simultaneously. Raymond still died in 1952. Margaret still died in 1953. History remained unchanged because her family hadn't believed her, because the warning from the future sounded like madness, because time protected itself through disbelief. Elena drove home in tears, understanding now why her younger self in the photographs had looked so afraid. She'd known even while taking those pictures that she was failing, that documenting the attempt wasn't the same as preventing the tragedy. But something felt wrong as she pulled into her driveway. The house was different. Small changes. The fence was another color. The mailbox had moved. Her neighbor's car was a different model. Elena went inside, found photos on her mantle that hadn't been there before. Raymond, elderly, at her college graduation. Margaret, gray-haired and smiling, at Elena's wedding. They were alive. Both of them lived full lives. Memories flooded back, doubling, overlapping. She remembered them dying young, but also remembered them living, attending family events, growing old. Timeline adjustment, causality reconstructing itself. Her warning hadn't worked immediately. But somehow, eventually, something she'd done in 1952 created ripples that changed the future. Or maybe the photographs had changed. Maybe by finding them, by traveling back, by trying, she'd created new versions that showed different outcomes. Elena would never know for certain. Temporal mechanics didn't offer clear answers. But that night, she received an email from an address she didn't recognize. Raharlan 1952 at historicalmail.com. The message contained one line: "Thank you for trying. We believed you eventually. Raymond." The email was dated July 15th, 1952, sent from an address that shouldn't exist, using technology that wouldn't be invented for decades, arriving in 2025 through whatever temporal channel had opened. Elena checked the photographs again. They'd changed. Subtly. In the images, her past self was smiling now, not afraid. And in the background, barely visible, Raymond and Margaret were looking at the photo she'd shown them, really looking, examining it closely, starting to believe. Time remembered differently now. The photograph had changed its own past by documenting her future, creating a loop where the act of trying to change history became the thing that changed it, where the warning was the cure. Elena keeps the photos in a safe place now. Sometimes they show different details, subtle shifts, history adjusting around the paradox she created. And sometimes, late at night, she receives emails from 1,952 from family members who are both long dead and somehow still living, existing in whatever temporal space the photographs opened, writing her messages from 73 years ago that arrive in the present moment. "We believed you," her grandmother writes, from 1,953. "The photos you showed us came true. Everything you predicted happened. We tried to change what we could. History is flexible," Elena learned. The past can be rewritten by the future, proving it will try to rewrite the past. Photographs document what was, but also what will be, and sometimes what could have been. She stands by the old oak tree sometimes, on July 14th, wondering if another version of herself will appear, trying to warn her about something, holding photographs from a future she hasn't lived yet. Time is patient. The photographs remember everything. And somewhere in the space between then and now, between documentation and event, between memory and occurrence, the woman in the floral dress stands at a picnic in 1952, showing pictures from the future, creating the very proof she needs to be believed. The cycle continues. The photographs remember, and time, as it always does, finds a way to make paradox into truth.